Alright guys, so this is the last video for this week, just continuing with the topic of solving rational equations. The last time we only saw when there was one fraction on one side and another on the other side. We never saw problems like this, where now there's two fractions on one side, and we can't just cross multiply because there's more terms going on. So here's what we're going to do. To clear out the denominator, we're going to multiply by the LCD, the least common denominator. And basically what that is just what can both 4 and x go into so that when I multiply something in the top, they just cancel out? Well, the easy answer would just be 4x, right? Both of them can go into 4x, just multiplying by each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this side of the equation and multiply everything by 4x. Now, technically, that's 4x over 1. And then I'm going to take this side of the equation and do the exact same thing to balance it. If it helps you to write over 1, you can, but it's not necessary. You don't have to. So let's look at the left side. So this 4x gets distributed to both of them. So you can do this really quickly in your head, but I am going to write out just the first time like what we're technically doing. So we're doing 4x times, and then what was in parentheses, 5 over x, and then we're also doing the other one, so plus 4x times 7 over 4. Now, the reason I say you can do this really quickly in your head, and actually before I do, I'll just go ahead and say equals, and then we're doing negative 9 over x times 4x. Okay, so why I say you can do this quickly in your head is because these x's will cancel, and over here on this one, these 4's will cancel. So what I'll be left with is just doing 4 times 5, which is 20, plus, and then over here, these 4's canceled, so I just have 7x equals, and then over here, these x's will cancel, so I just have negative 9 times 4, which is negative 36. So I very quickly just got a normal equation by multiplying everything by the LCD of all three of the denominators. Okay, so let me backtrack, because this whole thing right here you normally don't need to write out because you should be able to visualize that pretty easily in your head. So let me back up and show you exactly how I visualize that. So I think about taking the 4x and doing it, multiplying it with just this first one, and then I say, oh, the x and the x cancel, so just 4 times 5 is left. That's how I got the 20. And then let's do it again. So take 4x, and now this time multiplying it by the 7 over 4, and then I'd say, oh, well, in this one, the 4 and the 4 cancel, so all I have left is 7 and x, and that's how I got this. And then over here on the other side, instead of writing it out, I could have just said the x and the x cancel, so all I do is negative 9 times negative 4. So the whole point of multiplying by 4x is that a lot of things canceled. And the reason that a lot of the things canceled is because I took the LCD, the least common denominator, of all of these denominators, 4 and x. And all of those can just go into 4x. Usually if you just multiply them together, that'll work. Okay, so now let's just solve this simple equation that was 20 plus 7x equals negative 36. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to minus 20 to both sides. So I get 7x equals negative 56. And then I'll divide by 7, and I get x equals negative 8. Okay, so I think that's my answer, but remember we always need to check for extraneous solutions because sometimes maybe there is no answer. So over here, let's make some room to check our answers. So if x equals negative 8, then it would be 5 over negative 8 plus 7 over 4 equals negative 9 over negative 8. Okay, well, right off the bat, those negatives cancel. And then this I'm just going to type on my calculator. So type that in with me. Negative 5 divided by 8 plus 7 fourths. You'll get a decimal that says 1.125. And then math frac it, and you'll see that that's 9 over 8, which is exactly what we got over here. So I know that I do not have an extraneous solution, and x equals negative 8 is correct. Okay. So let's try pretty much the exact same thing, just with a different example. So here are my three terms. 1 doesn't look like a fraction, but anything can be a fraction, so you can think about that as being like 1 over 1 if that helps you to view all three of them as fractions. And then I'm just looking for the least common denominator, the LCD, of these three things. Well, 1 can be divided by anything, so we can really just look at these two, and it'll always work if you just multiply them together. So I'm going to multiply every single thing in this equation, all three terms, by this, x times x minus 5. So imagine multiplying it to this one, and to this one. And I'm just going to imagine doing that, and then let's write out what we would get. So let's do the first one. Times 1 would just be itself. So that's going to be x minus 5. Okay, now let's do the second one. What's going to cancel here? Well, the x minus 5, remember this is, you can technically think about it being as over 1, so that it's clear that that's in the numerator. This x minus 5 and this x minus 5 would cancel, so then I just have this x times 8, so plus 8x. Or actually, no, that wasn't plus, let me see. That was minus, okay. I just had my pen over it, so I couldn't quite tell. So it's minus 8x. And now let's multiply that to the very last one. So what's going to cancel is this x in the numerator and this x in the denominator. And so what's left is 3 times x minus 5. So by multiplying everything by the LCD, a long time ago I used to call this like a fraction buster, I think. At the beginning of the year we did really simple versions of this where you just, you really just knock out the denominators like in one step. Makes just one nice line easy equation. So now I'm just going to distribute and solve. So I need to distribute there and here. And that's going to give me x squared minus 5x minus 8x equals 3x minus 15. Okay, so let's put together some things. Negative 5x minus 8 is going to be negative 13. I'm just going to erase that and write negative 13x. But if I were to subtract this 3x from both sides, then that would actually be negative 16x. So let me do that. I'll move this, and I'll write negative 16x. And I'm only erasing just to save some space since I'm getting towards the bottom. So equals negative 15. Then I'm going to add 15 just so I have a quadratic set equal to 0. So that's x squared minus 16x plus 15 equals 0. And now I need to factor, and I'm looking for factors of 15 that add to get me to negative 16. Well, that would be 15 times 1, but they'd both be negative, right? Because if you do negative 15 times negative 1, you will get a positive 15, but if you add them together, you get negative 16. All right, so let me bring this up here, and I'm going to erase this. So that was x minus 15 and x minus 1 equals 0, which means my two answers are x equals 15 and x equals 1. Okay, so I think I'm done, but let's just check for extraneous solutions. Let's check x equals 15 first to see if that one works. So 1 minus 8 over 15 minus 5 is 10, equals 3 over 15, which I know I can reduce that to 1/5. So 1 minus 8 tenths is 2 tenths, so 2 tenths equals 3 over 15 is a little hard to compare unless I reduce them both. So 2 tenths, if you divide them by 2, you'd get 1/5, so I'm going to erase that and write 1/5. Or you could also just simplify that on your calculator and do math frac. And then 3/15, you can divide both those by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 15 divided by 3 is 5. So both sides equal 1/5, which means x equals 15 is an answer. All right, so now I'm going to check it using the other solution, which is x equals 1. So 1 minus 8 over 1 minus 5 is negative 4 equals 3 over 1, which is just 3. So let's see, 8 divided by negative 4 is negative 2, and then minus a negative means a positive. So this says 3 equals 3, which is definitely true. So actually both answers are an answer, and I do not have any extraneous solutions. So I know a lot of the ones that I've showed you guys do not have extraneous solutions. Don't think that that means all of the time there's not going to be extraneous solutions. There are, and it is important to check for it, and there are some in your homework. So don't think that just because none haven't come up yet, that none are never going to come up. They definitely do. All right, so I want you guys to pause and do this one on your own. You are starting by, you need to do a fraction buster, which is always the LCD. So think about, you have two x's, so that's easy because you can just think about it as x. X and 5, multiply them together, and what do you get? I'm not going to answer that, and then I want you to multiply that to all three fractions. So pause the video once you have found the LCD and you've multiplied it to all three things, and then hit play, because I'm going to have you guys check that step before you do the rest of it. All right, so pause here, get started, and then hit play when you're ready to check that first step. All right, so the LCD would be 5x. When I multiplied 5x times 15 over x, the x's canceled, and then all I had left was 15 times 5, which is how I got 75. When I did 5x times 4 over 5, the 5's canceled because one's on top and one's on bottom. And then I just had 4x, which I'm realizing now I wrote 20x for some reason. It's 4x. And then when I multiplied 5x times 7 over x, the x in the top and the x in the bottom cancel, and then I just get 35. Okay, so now let's just solve this equation. So I'm going to subtract 75 from both sides, and I get 4x equals negative 40, and then divide by 4. X equals negative 10. I think that's the answer, but let's just check and make sure that we do not have an extraneous solution. So if I check 15 over x, which is negative 10, plus 4/5, we're hoping that that equals 7 over negative 10. So with these numbers, once you have only numbers, you can do this really easily on your calculator and use that math frac function. So remember on your calculator to get that, hit the button that says math, and then your calculator's already highlighted on frac, and just hit enter, and it will put whatever decimal you had into a fraction form. So when I typed this in, I got negative 0.7, and then I hit math frac, and it said negative 7 over 10, which is exactly this side. So that's true, which means x equals negative 10 is the answer. Okay, so let's look at this next example. It's a little bit more involved because if you look, the denominators are a little bit more complicated. And my hint to you is, if you looked at this and you were thinking, okay, what's the LCD on 1 x squared minus 1 and x plus 1? You might be tempted just to multiply them together because when in doubt, that will always work. So you might be tempted to multiply everything by this because you're guaranteed that a lot of things will cancel. But you want to truly multiply by the least common denominator because the least thing you can do is going to make it by far easier. So if you were to actually do this out, you're going to end up with cube terms like x cubed when you FOIL things out. And it's going to just get really complicated. And we know how to solve quadratics, but we don't really know how to solve cubics. Or very few cubics, I should say. So what you want to do is if you ever have like an x squared term like we do here, really look at that very intensely before moving on and see like, can I factor that, simplify it, GCF, anything? If so, you definitely want to do that. So when I look at x squared minus 1, that's a difference of squares. If I were to take the square root of both, one of them would be x and the other would be 1. So I can make my factors x plus 1 and x minus 1. The other way of looking at that, I know that a lot of you liked, is imagining this as x squared plus 0x minus 1. And you're thinking of factors of negative 1 that add to get you 0. Well, that would be negative 1 times 1. They multiply to be negative 1, but they add to be 0, which is why I'm choosing those as my factors. So if you think about that denominator actually being x plus 1 and x minus 1, then I can already see that they have this piece in common. So if I were to multiply everything by x plus 1, then it would cancel here and here. But if we also want this one to cancel, then maybe we should multiply everything by x plus 1, x minus 1. And that'll cancel this entire denominator, and it will cancel most of that one, half of that one. So let's do that. Let's multiply everything by x plus 1, parentheses, x minus 1. And note that I could have just written, that's the exact same thing as just x squared minus 1. Like, these two things are equal. I just think it's easier to write it in this form because then it's like really, really clear what exactly is canceling. Okay, so let's multiply that to, let's start with just this piece. So what would cancel in that? The x plus 1 in the bottom would cancel with this one right here. So then all that's left is 4x plus 1 times x minus 1. So 4x plus 1 times x minus 1. Okay, equals. Now let me rewrite this back in and imagine this whole thing now multiplied by the second fraction. And what would cancel? Well, all of this would cancel with all of this. So all I have is 12. And then plus, and then I do have to, I shouldn't scribble it out probably because I keep rewriting it for you. But now let's do this times 3, times the last thing we have. Don't leave that one out. Well, nothing is canceling, and so that's just going to be 3 times that whole thing, x plus 1, x minus 1. But if you want, you could write it in this form. I'm doing that literally just because I'm running out of space on my screen. But either one you want to write it as. If you want to do this and then FOIL it back out later, you're just going to end up with this anyways. Okay, so let's simplify this out. So remember that this whole thing was really in parentheses because I'm doing all of this and then it was times this. So I need to just make sure that's in parentheses so it's really clear to me to FOIL that. So that's going to give me 4x squared minus 4x plus x minus 1 when I FOIL all that out equals 12 plus, and then I'm going to distribute this 3x squared, I'm not sure why I changed colors, minus 3. Okay, we are almost there. Once you distribute, it usually looks like you have a lot, but then things can combine together pretty quickly. I'm going to start by minusing this 3x squared, and then that will just give me x squared. I can combine these together. Negative 4x plus x is negative 3x. And then what do I have over here? 12 minus 3, which is 9. Okay, well, why don't I bring that 9 over? If I subtract 9, then this would be, let's see, negative 1 minus 9 is negative 10. Okay, so now I have a quadratic that I can hope to factor and be able to solve it. So what are factors of 10 that add to get me negative 3? So 5 and 2 and 1 and 10. To get to negative 3, I'll use 5 and 2, and I'll make the 5 negative. So x minus 5, x plus 2 equals 0. So this one will give me an answer of x equals 5, and this one will give me an answer of x equals negative 2. So I think these are my answers, but I do need to check for extraneous solutions. If you need to look over any of this work, then pause the screen here and look it over. I'm going to clear it in a second so I have room to check my answers. Alright, so I'm checking x equals 5 and x equals negative 2. So for x equals 5, let's do this one first. 4x plus 1 would be 21 over 6 equals 12 over x squared is 25, minus 1 is 24, and then plus 3. Okay, well I know that 12 divided by 24 that's just 1/2. So this side over here is 3.5. And then just get your calculators out and verify that 21 over 6 is 3.5, and it is. So I know that x equals 5, this one works. So let's check x equals negative 2. So plugging that in, 4 times negative 2 is negative 8, plus 1 is negative 7. Over x plus 1, that'd be negative 2 plus 1, so negative 1. Those negatives will cancel, so on this side, you just get 7. So 7 equals 12 over negative 2 squared is 4, and 4 minus 1 is 3, plus 3. And let's check here. 12 divided by 3 is 4. 4 plus 3 is indeed 7. So actually, both of them are answers. Neither of them are extraneous. Okay. Cool. Let's do another example, and then I'll have you guys try some of these, especially where you need to think through the factoring. So right away I'm noticing I do have one squared, but that can be factored by difference of squares. So I'm going to do that first. That way it's a lot easier to think through the LCD. So that's going to be x plus 3 and x minus 3. Okay, it's supposed to be 3. So imagine what I've scribbled out in green is what's written in green. So imagine that's just in its place. So I have x minus 3, this combination, and then x plus 3. Well, if I just multiply everything by this, then a lot of things will cancel. So let's do that. Let's multiply everything, all 3 fractions, by this product, x plus 3, x minus 3. So let's do it to this first one. What's going to cancel is the x minus 3. This will be gone. I'm not going to cross it out just because I need to use this 3 times, but that'll cancel with this one. So all I have to multiply is x plus 3 times 6. So 6 times x plus 3. And then let's do the second fraction. So what's going to cancel here? Well, you have this entire thing and this entire thing. So this is in the top and this is in the bottom. All of that's just going to go away and I'll just have that 8x squared. And that was not a plus, that was actually equals. So equals 8x squared. And then now let's do this whole thing to the last fraction. So what's going to cancel is the x plus 3 in the top and the x plus 3 in the bottom. And what I'll have left is, so let's see, minus 4x times, I'll have left this x minus 3. X minus 3. Okay, so let's distribute things and simplify. If you distribute this out, you get 6x plus 18 equals 8x squared minus, and then let's distribute this out, 4x squared plus 12. All right, and actually that was 12x, so I want to make sure I have that written in. So let's combine some things together. 8x squared minus 4x is 4x squared, so 4x squared plus 12x over here. And then why don't I just write a clean line, so 6x plus 18. Okay, let's get some things together. How about I subtract 6x, and I'm going to do it in one step. I'm also going to subtract 18. So I'll have 0 on this side. I'll have 4x squared plus 6x minus 18. Unfortunately, this is not a leading coefficient of 1. It's 4. And I can't divide all of these by 4. But notice what I can divide by is 2. So let's do that. Let's take a 2 out, and I'll have 2x squared plus 3x minus 9. And now this will be a little bit more easy to factor than if the leading coefficient was 4. So if I were to factor that, I'm just looking at the underlined part. If I were to factor that, how could I get 2x squared? Well, the only way possible is by doing 2x times 2x. Okay, and then what are factors of 9? Well, it's either 3 and 3 or 1 and 9. So let's just write 3 and 3 and see what combination, if there's a plus or minus combination that I could get to get this middle term of 3x. So when I FOIL, that'll be 2x squared. This will be 6x. I'm going to write it down as we go. And this part would be 3x. And of course, this part will give me the 9 that I wanted. Well, 6x and 3x, I could get to that positive 3x if I just subtract. So if I do plus 6x and then minus 3x, which means that I want to do the plus sign here. That way when I multiply these, I get 6x positive, and I want to do the negative here, because that means when I multiply these, I'll get negative 3x. So, oops, meant to erase. This is the factoring, and that is what I have to solve. So, if you need to look over any of these steps, do that now. I'm going to clear my screen and start with this at the top, set equal to 0, because that's what the equation is. All right, so I left off with 2x minus 3 times x plus 3 equals 0. So we need to set this equal to 0. It might actually be easier if we solve it. So add 3 to both sides and then divide by 2. Okay, and then for this one, it's easy to just eyeball it. X equals negative 3. All right, and again, let's check for extraneous solutions. So let's start with the 3 over 2. So I'm gonna clear the screen again and give me some room to check. So 6 over 3 over 2 minus 3, which let's just think what that is. 3 over 2 is 1.5. So if you do 1.5 minus 3, you get negative 1.5. I think it might just be easier to write it like that. equals 8 times x squared. On my calculator, I'm going to do 3/2, so 1.5, and I'm going to square that, and I get 2.25. If I multiply that by 8, I get 18. So I'll write 18 over, and then again I need to do x squared, so 3/2, that's 1.5. If you square that, you get 2.25. And then minus 9, I got negative 6.75. Minus 4 times x, so 4 times 1.5 is 6. So I'll just write 6. And I'm doing this on my calculator. And then denominator, x plus 3, so 1.5 plus 3 is 4.5. Okay, so let's do this. 6 divided by negative 1.5 gives you negative 4. 18 divided by negative 6.75 is a fraction, but then let's subtract this one, and I'm doing that in parentheses, and I am getting negative 4 when I do all that, so we are good to go. All right, so that's an answer. Let's check negative 3, and I do want you to watch carefully to this one because something weird will happen. So when x is negative 3, then that first fraction would be 6 over negative 3 minus 3 is negative 6, and 6 divided by negative 6 is just 1. So I'm just going to erase that and write, or not 1, negative 1. So negative 1 equals 8x squared, so 8 times negative 3 squared, which is 9. 8 times 9 is 72 over, and then negative 3 squared, again, that's 9. 9 minus 9 is 0. Okay, wait, so already there's an issue because I'm asking you to divide by 0, and I haven't even done this other thing, but already I know that this number right here is undefined. So there's no way it's going to equal negative 1 if I have something undefined right here. So already I can see this isn't working. That's going to be an extraneous solution because I can't divide by 0. That's never going to equal negative 1. So my only answer for this one is going to be that 3 over 2 answer. Okay, so I want you to pause the video and try this one on your own where you have a little bit more complicated denominators. Remember, the first step is look at the one that has a quadratic and see if you can factor that. And this time you can, and that's a difference of squares. So factor it and then multiply by that LCD. I want you to just do that part and then hit play and check your answer. Okay, so if I factor it, you get what you have in green, and that's going to be a perfect thing to multiply to all three because it'll cancel something in all three. So in the first one, it's going to cancel the x minus 2. So what I have left will be the x plus 2 because this one right here would cancel with the bottom. So I'll get 9 times x plus 2. And then in the second one, what's going to cancel, since I have x plus 2 in the bottom, it's going to cancel with this one in the top. So I'll just get plus 6x times x minus 2. And then equals, and then all of this is the exact same thing as x squared minus 4. We got that from factoring. So this entire thing will cancel with this entire thing. And over here, I'll just get 9x squared. So from here, I can simplify pretty easy from distributing. So that's going to be 9x plus 18 plus, and then let's distribute this, 6x squared minus 12x equals 9x squared. All right, so let's simplify where I can simplify. Let's subtract 6x squared from both sides. And let's also put together this 9x minus 12x, which will be negative 3x. And then I still have this plus 18, and then over here, that gives me 3x squared. And then why don't we just actually, I know I just moved that over to combine them, but now that they're combined, I'm going to subtract 3x squared just to get everything on one side. So now I have negative 3x squared minus 3x plus 18 equals 0. If I factor that, I can divide everything by negative 3. And you know what, pause here if you need to look anything because I'm going to clear and get some more space. So when I divide out the negative 3, I get what I have in red at the top of the screen. And now it makes this part a lot easier to factor because now my leading coefficient is 1 right here. So factors of negative 6 that add to get me 1 would be 3 and negative 2. So when I factor it, I'll get this, which tells me this answer is negative 3 and this answer is positive 2. Okay, so from here you have to check your answer, and my video cuts off at 30 minutes, and I am very close to that, so I don't have time to check my answer, but I highly encourage that you do. And when you do, you will see that this one is the only one that works, and x equals 2 is extraneous. All right, so that's it for today, you guys. Have a good one.